It was barely an hour after the moving truck had pulled away that I heard the knock, not a polite one, either. The kind of knock that demands attention, loud and fast, as if there were an emergency. I hadn't even unpacked my coffee maker yet. Still surrounded by boxes and bubble wrap, I opened the front door and was greeted by a woman in her late 50s, clipboard in hand, flanked by two others with matching sour expressions. They didn't even introduce themselves. Are you aware, she started without preamble, that personal alterations to the lake are not permitted under WA regulations? I blinked. I just moved in. We noticed, she said, with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. That's why we're here. The WA must inform new residents of community policies right away. We have standards. Okay, I said slowly. And, what does that have to do with the lake? She looked at me as though I were being deliberately obtuse. The lake, she said with a little too much emphasis, is a shared feature of the neighborhood. The WA manages access, aesthetics, usage times, everything. We've had issues with people trying to claim it or beautify it. We just want to get ahead of any potential problems. I was still stuck on the words, shared feature. I had bought this house after months of negotiations, land surveys, title searches, every inch of the property had been confirmed. I hadn't just bought the house. I had bought the lake. I'm sorry, I said, but I believe there's a misunderstanding. The lake is on my deed. It's part of the parcel I own. The three of them looked at each other and laughed, not in a friendly way, but the kind of chuckle people use to mask condescension. The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. No, she said. It's in the neighborhood. Which means it's HOA governed. If it were private, you wouldn't have community docks on it. That stopped me. I hadn't noticed the docks yet, too busy unloading and trying to figure out which box my silverware had ended up in, but I'd seen some walkways and canoes when I toured the place. Still, it didn't make sense. If the WA governed the lake, why was it listed in the parcel I'd purchased? Why had I signed a set of environmental and maintenance responsibilities specific to the lake and its wildlife? I didn't argue then. Not because I was intimidated, but because I was curious. These people had clearly been in charge for so long that the idea of someone owning their lake was inconceivable. I told them I'd look into it and close the door before they could start reading more rules to me. That night, I went through my documents again. The deed was clear. The lake, all 8 acres of it, was mine. The shoreline, the water, the airspace above. Everything up to the HOA's own backyards. And most importantly, the docks. There were 5 of them. Wooden, a little weathered, some clearly maintained better than others. One even had a small motorboat tied to it. And none of them had been part of my inspection walkthrough. I'd assumed they were decorative or possibly community managed. But the survey maps were unambiguous. The docks sat squarely within the bounds of my property. I didn't sleep much that night. Not out of worry, but because my mind was spinning with the implications. The WA had confronted me the moment I moved in, assuming I'd fall in line. But they had no idea they were using docks they didn't own, docks that, technically, they were trespassing on. It felt like I'd stumbled into some kind of bizarre suburban power game. The next day, I walked the perimeter of the lake. Sure enough, every dock had signs posted with the HOA's logo, listing rules. No fishing after 8 p.m., no loud music, boats must be registered with the association. There were even small security cameras on 2 of them, pointed toward the water. That was what really got me. They hadn't just claimed the docks. They had been policing them, enforcing rules as if they were on their own turf. I took photos. Lots of them. Docks, signs, cameras, even a maintenance schedule stapled to a post. Then I returned to the house and made a few calls. The title company confirmed everything again. The docks were within my property. If they'd been built before I bought the house, which they had, they were now mine. Fixtures attached to my land. The WA had never gotten a license, lease, or easement to maintain or use them. And best of all, any non-owner using them without permission was, legally speaking, trespassing. That afternoon, I wrote a letter. It was calm, formal, and very clear. I included copies of the survey, deed, and title documents. I explained that the lake, including all docks, was private property. That I had no intention of removing access yet, but that any further action by the WA implying ownership or control over the lake would be met with legal consequences. I also requested they remove all unauthorized signage and surveillance equipment from my property within 10 days. I dropped the envelope off at the WA office myself, enjoying the confused expression of the receptionist when I said I was the lake owner. 2 days passed before I got a response. Not from the woman with the clipboard, but from someone calling himself the WA General Counsel, who attached a vaguely threatening letter demanding a meeting. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I spent the next couple of days enjoying my new home, and watching, from my back window, as a few of the board members visited the docks, read my posted notices. I had stapled my own signs beside theirs, and left looking visibly rattled. It was clear they had no clue how badly they'd misplayed this. They'd assumed I was just another homeowner, one who would roll over, pay dues, follow rules, and maybe attend the annual barbecue. What they got instead was someone holding the title to their favorite playground. And I wasn't even finished yet. The following is an expanded version of part 2 in approximately 1,000 words, continuing the story and deepening the conflict, character actions, and emotional tension. The WA president, a stiff-collared man named Douglas with a clipboard seemingly fused to his hand, stood on my porch the morning after I moved in. His knock wasn't friendly, and neither was his tone when I opened the door. "You need to take down that temporary fence near the shoreline. It's non-compliant," he barked without introducing himself. I was still holding a coffee cup, barely halfway through my first morning in the house. I blinked at him. "Excuse me," I said. "The fence. It's obstructing community access to the lake. WA rules clearly state." I cut him off. "That shoreline is part of my property." He didn't flinch. "The lake is community property. The docks are used by residents, and you can't just put up barriers as if you own it." I stared at him for a second, then stepped back into the house. I came back with a folder, the paperwork from the sale. "You see this section here?" I pointed to the plat map, then flipped to the deed. "I own the lake. And the docks. They're sitting on my submerged land." For a second, Douglas hesitated, visibly flustered, but recovered fast. "I don't think you understand how things work here. Those docks have been used by residents for years. Just because something's on paper doesn't mean you can trample on decades of community usage." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a turf war. I'd bought a piece of land they believed belonged to them by tradition, even though the legal documents proved otherwise. I didn't move here to cause conflict. But I also wasn't going to be bullied. The next week was chaos. Emails from the WA board came in a flurry. One accused me of unneighborly behavior. Another insisted I was disrupting the neighborhood's harmony. Several tried to guilt-trip me with stories of community barbecues on the docks, 4th of July boat parades, and how the lake was a part of our identity. They tried everything: legal threats, emotional manipulation, even a few veiled suggestions that I might find it difficult to fit in if I didn't comply. I sent one polite email back: "Please direct all further communications through my attorney." That didn't go over well. By the second week, someone had torn down the temporary fence I'd put up along the path leading to the docks. I replaced it with a more permanent one: aluminum posts and a locking gate. The same night, someone egged my garage door. I installed cameras the next morning. No one egged anything again. Still, the WA wasn't done. They called a special meeting, inviting all homeowners, and posted a notice in every mailbox, along with a picture of me, standing on the dock, labeled, "New Neighbor Blocks Lake Access." They wanted to rally the neighborhood against me. I showed up at the meeting. It was held in the community center, a beige room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs. There were about 30 people there, most of them seated in a semicircle while Douglas stood in front, theatrically shuffling papers. When I walked in, the room got quiet. This meeting is to discuss the recent changes affecting our access to Lake Beechwood, Douglas began. As you all know, our community has enjoyed these waters for generations. Even though none of you own them, I interrupted, stepping forward. I do. That earned a murmur of disapproval. One woman gasped. Another muttered, unbelievable. I held up the deed again. This isn't about tradition. It's about property lines. When I bought the house, I didn't just get the land you see. I got the lake, the submerged land under the docks, and everything within that boundary. I didn't build those docks. But they're sitting on land I now own. Legally. Douglas tried to interject, but I raised my voice over him. I'm not here to be the villain. I understand the lake's been important to this neighborhood. I'm even open to working something out, maybe a lease agreement, shared access with proper liability waivers, but you all came at me like I was an intruder. You don't get to demand access to something you don't own. An older man in the back spoke up. But my grandchildren swim there every summer. Are you really going to lock them out? I nodded. If you're asking if I'm going to enforce my property rights when people continue to trespass and vandalize my property, then yes. I will. But if you want to work together, I'm open to that. What I'm not going to do is tolerate threats and vandalism. Silence fell again. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. A woman in a floral blouse stood and asked, why didn't the WA know the lake was part of the sale? I turned to Douglas. He didn't answer. I knew why. The WA had assumed that no buyer would come along and care enough to enforce lake ownership. They'd grown comfortable. They thought the lake belonged to them in spirit, so they never verified who actually held the rights. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached me quietly. Some were apologetic. One man admitted he had always wondered why the WA didn't pay any taxes on the docks. Another offered to help me restore the shoreline fence properly. That was the first real sign that not everyone in the neighborhood was on Douglas's side. The turning point came a week later when I filed formal notices of trespass for the docks. I sent them to the WA and to the individuals I knew had been using the slips regularly. I included a deadline: either negotiate a rental or remove the docks. It was brutal. They scrambled. Boats were towed. Kayaks hauled off. The WA tried to fight it in county court, but the judge took one look at the plat map and shut it down immediately. The lake was mine, and the docks were sitting illegally on my land. 3 weeks later, Douglas resigned from the WA board. A new president was elected, Carla, the woman in the floral blouse from the meeting. She called me and asked if we could meet for coffee. We did. She brought 2 things: a list of homeowners interested in negotiating dock leases, and a sincere apology. I brought my lawyer. Now, the neighborhood is quieter. Some people still avoid eye contact when I walk by. Others wave. The docks are still there, but now they generate monthly income. I reinvested some of that into maintaining the lake, cleaner water, better fish stocking, even a small beach area I let kids use with supervision. The WA stormed in thinking they could control me. What they didn't realize was that I owned what they thought was theirs. Not just the lake, but the leverage.